Our next speaker is Ava Tompkins, herself a licensed attorney coming out to us from New Jersey. She has spoken with the Wisdom Pearl now for a number of years. She is coming here this morning to tell you about central bank digital currency and artificial intelligence. She has been long on this trail for quite a while, seeing what the World Economic Forum and other things across the pond in Europe have been trying to see how they can maybe control your lives in a way that we don't like. So I would like you to put your hands together as we welcome Eva Tompkins.
So I'll be speaking to you today about CBDCs, tokenization of assets, and Revelation 13. And you should know that this is not financial advice. This is just for educational purposes only. I can't tell you what to do with your 401k. I can't tell you what you should do with your investments. I'm not licensed to. And you really need to speak to a professional about that if you have questions about that. But who am I? Why should you listen to me? I'm a New York lawyer. I'm retired from the practice of law in 2016 to start my business participating in the financial markets. And I'm a trader of currencies, equity, and commodity futures. So I'm still licensed as an attorney, but I don't practice anymore. I trade the markets. So since I trade the markets, I am constantly watching the central banks and what they're doing. And during the pandemic, I saw them making some significant changes to the financial system, which most people aren't aware of, but I'm going to explain it to you. So it's my job to know what's happening with money, and I take that seriously. So my ministry is Revelation 13:17 cbdcwatch.substack.com. I write a Substack and I speak about CBDCs, tokenization of assets, and basically if you read Revelation 13, particularly 15 through 17, what it talks about is that those people who worship the beast will have the mark of the beast, and they will be able to buy and sell freely. But if you worship God, and if you're sealed with the seal of God, you will not be able to buy or sell. And we need to wrap our heads around this. It's very important that we understand this about the Bible and about Revelation prophecy, because we don't want to be lost because we're attached to our money or our things. We want to be sealed with the seal of God, and we want to be raised to meet Jesus in the first resurrection and not suffer the final death that comes in the second resurrection. The group that will be marked with the mark of the beast, that worship the beast, will be in the second resurrection. We worship God and we want to be sealed with God's seal. So we want to be in that first resurrection. So it's critical that we pass this test that's coming. There's a test coming, and I will show you that they are building the architecture for this test around the world, globally. So let's just go back for a second. Revelation 13:17 states that no man might buy or sell save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. How could they do that? How could they stop you from buying or selling? How could they control your money? How could they control your assets? How could they take your assets from you? I will show you evidence of how they will do that. So the architecture to enforce Satan's no buy, no sell policy is 1, CBDCs, which are a tool of financial surveillance and control. And CBDCs stands for central bank digital currencies. The second tool, which I'll talk about a little later, is tokenization of all real-world assets on the global unified ledger. And that is a plan of the Bank of International Settlements that they released in their 2023 annual report, I believe in June, or it was the 2022 annual report. It was released in June 2023. But I'll show you that. So what are central bank digital currencies? And if you've heard me talk about this subject before, some of the slides you're going to see, you've seen before. This is by design. Okay, you need to see them again, because I find when I talk to people about this, that in the West, we're so accustomed to having freedom, or at least some degree of perceived freedom, that it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around the fact that someone can control whether or not you could buy or sell, whether or not you could spend the currency in your wallet. But I'll show you how they will be able to do that. So central bank digital currency is fully programmable, fully traceable. We need to understand this. Digital currency that's centralized and distributed by a government or its central bank, because it's centralized to one authority as opposed to being decentralized, it's fully controlled and fully programmed by the authority that issues it. And the programmability aspect is key. This means the government can, number one, surveil all your financial transactions, and two, control when, where, and upon what you can spend the currency. So why are CBDCs a threat to liberty? With CBDCs, the government would have the authority to decide and the power to enforce how you may or may not spend the CBDC that would be assigned to your digital wallet and tied to your digital ID. So digital wallets and digital IDs are a component of this. CBDCs are designed to financially constrain the user in any way that the government wishes to constrain the user to elicit whatever behavior it wants from the user. So this, and don't take my word for it, please. I will show you central bankers who are telling you this. You know, there's a principle in the Bible that says that before something can happen or fulfill in prophecy, we're told about it first, we're warned about it. So these are the central bankers telling you the control that they will be able to exercise over you with CBDCs and with tokenization of assets. So this is the Bank of International Settlements General Manager in October 2020 describing the difference between cash and digital currency. And he says, there's a huge difference there. People think it's the same, he was saying, but there's a huge difference there. For example, with cash, physical cash, the green paper that you have in your wallet, we don't know who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who's using a $1,000 peso bill today. The key difference is that with CBDC, the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of the expression of central bank liability and will have the technology to enforce that. So what he's saying there is CBDC is a liability on the central bank when it's issued to you. They'll have the absolute control as to how you spend it, if you can spend it, if you can have it, on what you can spend it, when and where you can spend it. And they'll have the technology to enforce that. So this is a statement from International Monetary Fund Deputy Managing Director Bo Li. He's formerly a deputy governor of the People's Bank of China, talking about the programmability of money at an IMF panel in 2023. And he says, financial inclusion is through what we call programmability, and that's the key, programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contracts, to allow targeted policy functions, for example, welfare payment, for example, consumption coupon, for example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those monies can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own them, what kind of use the money can be utilized. So they can control who can get it, and they control how you can spend it, fully control it. So this potential, he says, for example, for food, so this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those who need support. That way they can also improve financial inclusion, he says, but it's basically control. And one of the world's most brilliant economists, Richard Warner, gave this interview that's a part of this documentary that's being developed called CBDC, The End of Money. And he basically explains how central bankers want CBDCs because they want that control. And this video was released on August 31st of 2024. Professor Richard Warner says CBDCs are presented as if they're brand new, when the reality is we've been using BDCs, bank digital currency. You know, a lot of us don't use paper. A lot of us use these plastic cards. That's really bank digital currency. They can control you through that. They can control you more efficiently with CBDCs. So the only difference is the central aspect, he explains. And who's pushing for this? The central planners, meaning the central bankers. Is there a need for it? He says, no, there is absolutely no need for this because the current financial system doesn't have any problems in terms of settlement of transactions, in terms of settlement and transactions, because you have a choice. Once you introduce CBDCs, there's many risks and dangers of that, but one obvious one is that you're actually going to reduce choices because for CBDCs to properly do their job, he says, from the perspective of the issuer, the central banks, you need to get rid of the competition. You need to get rid of cash. That is actually a declared goal of CBDCs, he says. You've got plenty of studies by central bankers and other economists in favor of CBDCs arguing that we need to abolish cash and then introduce CBDCs because then we can have negative interest rates and we can take money directly out of people's pockets. That's what negative interest rates are. If you have negative interest rates, portions of money are deducted from your account periodically. And it's not unheard of because Japan had a negative interest rate policy from 2016 to 2023. Professor Warner continues, while you still have cash, you can flee from the financial system and put your money in cash, and then they can't punish you with negative interest rates. That's why they want to abolish cash. But most of all, the really big dangers of CBDCs are in its programmability, which is essentially it's not even money. Your money becomes potential money because it depends on a central planner to agree that you should now be allowed to spend this money at this location for this particular transaction and in this particular volume if you want to. But why should this be conditional? When they describe programmability, that's what it's all about. They will be able to control if you can spend the money at this location in this particular volume for this particular item. He continues, the push for CBDCs is a final step in a multi-decade program by central planners to increase their power over the people and over countries. This is the ultimate step because the powers of CBDCs are so extraordinary that, even the worst dictators in past centuries could only have dreamt of having such enormous power over the lives of so many people. This is coming from one of the leading economists in the world. So it's very serious, the central bank digital currencies, it's control. He says, well, one counter argument over this is to say, well, okay, it's a power tool for central planners, but they're too busy. How could they plan or micromanage, 80 million people in Germany or millions of people? Well, that's where AI comes in, isn't it? In other words, it will be algorithms that will, for the majority, control their spending in the future. The micromanaging decision will then be automated. And that's even more dystopian. He says, you have no right to appeal the algorithm because there's so many masses and so many transactions, really. You can't practically have an appeal process. You just won't be able to use the money for certain things, and there's nothing you can do. And you can find his video there. I'm going to run some of these slides very quickly, but all of these slides will be posted on my Substack, revelation1317cbdcwatch.substack.com. Now let's listen to, let's hear from, or see the transcript of Neil Kashkari, president of the Federal Reserve of the Bank of Minneapolis. This is a central banker telling you what kind of control you'll see with CBDCs. And he basically says CBDCs don't solve any actual problems other than to enable central bankers to monitor all transactions, impose negative interest rates, which is a deduction from your account, and deduct taxes directly from your accounts in real time. They don't add anything novel to the market in terms of benefits for consumers. So Neil Kashkari said when he was asked about CBDCs, he says, I keep asking anybody at the Fed or outside the Fed to explain to me what problem this is solving. He says, I can send anybody in this room $5 with Venmo right now. And somebody laughed in the background. He says, right? No, seriously. So what is it the CBDC could do that Venmo can't do? And all I get is a bunch of hand waving. Well, China's doing it. Well, I can see why China would do it. If they want to monitor every one of your transactions, you could do that with central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. If you want to impose negative interest rates, you could do that with central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. And if you want to directly tax customer accounts, you can't do that with Venmo. You could do that with central bank digital currency. So I get why China would be interested, but why would the American people be for that? The American people wouldn't be for that if they understood it. So just to summarize with CBDC, a central bank or government can see all your transactions in real time and tax you instantly, mandate that any and all medical procedures or shots must be taken. They'll have the ability to turn off your money if you don't comply. They could turn off your money if they don't like what you post on social media. They could turn off your money if they don't like your religious practices. If there was a Sunday law passed or a certain religious day passed, they could turn off your money if you don't comply with their law. So CBDCs could also be programmed to expire within 30 days or at any time period, forcing you to spend the money and convert it to goods before it evaporates. That's a feature they actually like because they can control the money supply better that way. Your money could be programmed so it can't be used to buy certain foods, goods, or services, especially if they deem that your carbon footprint score was too high. Like you couldn't buy, they could say you can't buy any more flights or rental cars or buy any more gas. The central bank could institute negative interest rates, which would cause a portion of your money to be periodically deducted, like I explained earlier. So this was interesting. Catherine Austin Fitts is an investment banker. And when she explains her background, she explains that she was educated and trained to be a central banker, but she never actually went to the central banks. But she's a fascinating investment banker and very successful. And she was interviewed on CBDCs, the Unified Ledger Programmability, and the possibility of central bank control over how we spend our money. And this was on June 12th, 2024. And she basically said, if you look at people behind the central bankers who want and are pushing the CBD system, they have no intention of being reasonable. She says, and digital technology allows them to reset the economy and reset the governance and management system on planet Earth to a wholly new system. You cannot fathom where these people want to go, she says. Let's go back to the lockdowns. If I don't want you leaving your house, it's really easy to force this with CBDCs. I can simply say your money won't work. You can shop online and you can have it delivered to your home, but you can't buy gas, you can't buy food, you can't travel. Your money won't work because it's programmed. That's the programmability aspect. And the reality is with AI and software, they can manage you one person at a time. So the rules that can be applied to you are totally the rules that can be applied to your wife. So with a social credit system, if your wife is behaving better than you are, they will custom design the controls. She's basically saying that if your wife is behaving better than you are, she'll have more privileges and you will be restricted in what you can do with your money or with your assets. Ultimately, she says, this entire system can be run from Basel, Switzerland, which can be run by Lockheed Martin and BlackRock. When she says Basel, Switzerland, that's the location of the Bank of International Settlements. That is the central bank for all the central banks. They really are in control. And so, or they want to be in control. So just another example of control that was seen in CBDC pilot code. In Brazil's CBDC pilot, a developer found that the code contained code that would allow the central bank to, at will, freeze and unfreeze accounts, increase and decrease account balances, move currency from one address to another, and create or burn digital real from a specific address. So that's really very interesting. That's how much they can control it. That's what they could do with it. And that was directly in the code that he examined in this pilot project in Brazil. CBDCs are being explored, tested, and developed worldwide, and I'll show you this. According to data from the Atlantic Council, as of March 2024, and even recently, the data is still the same, 134 countries and currency unions representing 98% of global GDP are exploring a CBDC. So this is a worldwide phenomenon. Here's a map showing all the different phases of a retail CBDC around the world, according to the Atlantic Council. And this is the address where you can find this information, atlanticcouncil.org/CBDC-tracker/. And this is information from cbdctracker.org. This is a map showing what they've seen as far as development of CBDCs around the world. This is how many countries around the world are pursuing this. This is a worldwide global thing. There's a difference between synthetic CBDC and direct issue CBDC. You could have the central bank directly issuing a CBDC, or a synthetic version would be if JP Morgan were to issue it to you in the form of stablecoins or something like that. It would pass from the central bank to JP Morgan to you. The intermediary bank would stand between you and the central bank, and that's a synthetic CBDC model. So both the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank have said that they'll pursue that type of system. And Powell confirmed this when he testified before the Senate Banking Committee on March 7th, 2024. He said, if we were ever to do something like this, and we're a very long way from even thinking about it, and this is something he's been saying a lot lately, we're not even thinking about CBDCs. You don't have to worry about it. I'll show you, not only have they been thinking about it, they've successfully tested it, and it's basically ready to go. It's extreme. Their tests have been extremely successful. So he says, we would do this through the banking system. The last thing we would want with the Federal Reserve would be to have individual accounts for all Americans, or any Americans for that matter. So he's confirming that there would be a major bank between you and the central bank. That would be the synthetic CBDC model, and would probably be in the form of a stable coin, such as JP Morgan has a coin called JPM coin. Wells Fargo, I think, has a coin. PayPal has a stable coin, PYUSD. All of these financial institutions are developing their own stable coins. In July 2023, the Fed launched FedNow, which is the infrastructure that would support a CBDC. It's basically a fast payment system, and it lays the foundation for a U.S. CBDC. The Fed's goal is to get 10,000 financial institutions onboarded onto this program. They only have 940 so far, with 33 settlement agents and 33 certified service providers. But he keeps saying, people don't need to worry about this. We're nowhere near adopting this. Project Hamilton is a multi-year exploratory research project by the Boston Fed and MIT. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, the Boston Fed, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, are collaborating and have been collaborating on an exploratory research project known as Project Hamilton. And it's to explore the CBDC design base and gain a hands-on understanding of CBDC's technical challenges and opportunities. So in December 2022, they developed a core processing engine called OpenCBDC that was so successful. It focuses on security, performance, scalability, flexibility, and it provided a code base that supported 1.84 million transactions per second, with settlement of that transaction happening in less than a second. That is way higher than transactions are processed today. Very much higher, exponentially higher than they're processed today. Their tests have been very successful, and it's basically ready to go. So how soon could Congress respond in a real or perceived crisis, such as the pandemic? Well, we saw with the pandemic that Congress passed the CARES Act and the PrEP Act 2 months and 26 days after the pandemic was reported to the WHO. That's very quick. And they could do it just as quickly if there were some perceived crisis, some global economic crisis, or some global terrorist cybersecurity process that, or event that said, you know what, we need CBDCs because we need to see what those terrorists are doing. They could enact this very quickly. This could be a reality very, very quickly if there was a crisis. Or if there's a number of bank failures, they could launch a CBDC. If there are enough bank failures, they could say, we have to stabilize the currency. We have to release a CBDC to do so. It wouldn't actually do so. In reality, it's the same. It wouldn't create anything new, except it would have control over you. But he said on March 7th, 2024, before the Senate Banking Committee, we've identified the banks that have high commercial real estate concentrations. A lot of banks are seriously stressed because the Fed raised interest rates so fast, so high, so fast. They're under stress. He says, this is a problem that we'll be working on for years more. There will be bank failures, he says, but not the big banks. So they have a plan their plan is to hopefully save the big banks, but if some smaller banks or many smaller banks have to be sacrificed along the way, That's what he anticipates. And at the end of Q1, the FDC reported that the losses, the unrealized losses across the banking sector for available for sale and held to maturity securities increased by 39 billion to 517 billion in the first 3 months of 2024. The banks are under stress because of these high interest rates, and the Fed knows it. So, and Chairman Powell said we will see bank failures. They're expecting this. We've seen 4 bank failures since 2023, and he's expecting more. There's another aspect that makes this global reality, and this is the SWIFT Global Bank Messaging Network announced on March 26, 2024, that it's planning to launch its CBDC platform in 1 to 2 years. And it's so successful. It's called the Sandbox Project. The SWIFT network accommodates 44 million messages a day approximately. It's so successful, their project, they could demonstrate that they could ensure that different countries' CBDCs, even if they were built with different protocols or on different platforms, they could be used together interchangeably with their Sandbox project, which was a successful test of their platform. And they feel confident to release this in 1 to 2 years. So this is how close we are to this. We are truly living in the last days. And this would be a key piece of the prophecy set forth in Revelation 13:17. The Bank of International Settlements released a survey of 86 central banks, which showed that 94% of these banks were working on a CBDC, representing 94% of global economic output. And the way that they want to control your money in this survey revealed they want to affect your access with an obligation for merchants to accept it. They want to limit your balances. They want to limit transactions. And they want to enable capital flow management measures, which would affect how you could spend it. They also liked programmable payments and programmable money. So the second aspect to this is tokenization of private assets in the global unified ledger, where CBDC is just your money. Tokenization of real world assets and your private assets is everything else. And this is what the Bank of International Settlements released on June 2023 in their annual report. And it was titled Blueprint for the Future Monetary System, Improving the Old and Enabling the New. And according to the BIS report, in a tokenized setting, the token would be programmed with rules and information as to who owns the asset, how the asset can be transferred, if it can be transferred. And these objects, these tokens, would be maintained on programmable platforms. They explained in their report, tokens are not merely digital entries in a database. Rather, they integrate the records of the underlying asset normally found in a traditional database with the rules and logic governing the transfer process for that asset. So they also explained that their programmable platform would have a data environment that would encompass not only all the tokenized assets, but all information necessary to incorporate real-world events into any contingent performance of actions. What does that mean practically? Practically, that means that if you were involved in the trucker convoy protest in Canada, they could take your assets if they didn't like what you were doing at that protest. If they didn't like your support of the truckers, they could take your assets. If you were unfortunately found in DC on January 6th, they could easily sweep away all of your assets on this programmable platform, because that real world information that you were there at that protest could go into their programmable platform, and they could sweep away the tokens and take your assets. So tokenization is a process that's ongoing, and it's estimated by 2030, 16 trillion worth of assets could be tokenized. I've even seen experts say that they estimate 30 trillion could be tokenized by 2030. So this is happening. And if you've seen this phrase from the World Economic Forum, it's 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. This is how they could accomplish this. through CBDCs and the tokenization of all assets on the global unified ledger. So how does artificial intelligence play into all of this? Well, we saw what Catherine Austin Fitts said about it. How are they using it so far? So the Bank of International Settlements does have a project where they're working with AI. They released a report on June 30, 2024, Artificial Intelligence and the Economy Implications for Central Banks. And they've been testing this. It's in this, and they say in their report, it's in the payment system where AI holds the greatest potential. Project Aurora is the project they're working on. It aims to detect money laundering activity, and their first phase was concluded in May 2023. AI tools can improve the detection of money laundering networks, as illustrated by Project Aurora from the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements Innovation Hub. So they want to use AI to detect money laundering. Well, they concluded that based on their proof of concept, it was quite successful. In fact, this is a graph showing that their existing rule-based model is a shorter line. The graph neural network using AI was the longest, so they found it was more efficient. But they also acknowledged that the adoption of AI could increase the risk of cyber attacks and introduce altogether new sources of cyber risk. This is a reality, but they think they can control it. The Bank of International Settlements, in their 2024 annual report, also talked about artificial intelligence, and they said in their key takeaways, machine learning models excel at harnessing massive computing power to impose structure on unstructured data, giving rise to artificial intelligence AI applications that have seen rapid and widespread adoption in many fields. The rise of AI has implications for the financial system, they say, its stability, as well as for macroeconomic outcomes via changes in aggregate supply through productivity and demand. So they want to use AI to control these things. They said central banks are directly affected by AI's impact, both in their role as stewards of monetary and financial stability and users of AI tools. To address emerging challenges, they need to anticipate AI's effects across the economy and harness AI in their own operations. And data availability and data governance were key enabling factors for central banks' use of AI. Both rely on cooperation along several fronts, and they discussed this. But also from the BIS annual report, they said, of course, there's a substantial uncertainty about the long-term capabilities of Gen AI. Current LLMs can fail elementary logical reasoning tasks and struggle with counterfactual reasoning, as illustrated in the recent BIS work. For example, when posed with a logical puzzle that demands reasoning about the knowledge of others and about counterfactuals, LLMs display a distinctive pattern of failure, they say in their report. They perform flawlessly when presented with the original wording of a puzzle, which they've likely seen during their training, but they falter when the same problem is presented with minor, small changes of innocuous details, such as names and dates, suggesting a lack of true understanding of the underlying logic of statements. And they want to put this in charge of detecting money laundering. Problematic at best. Ultimately, they say in their annual report, current LLMs do not know what they do not know. LLMs also suffer from hallucination problem. They can present a factually incorrect answer as if it were correct, and even invent secondary sources to back up their fake claims. And they want to put this in charge of detecting money laundering and fraud. Problematic, I think. Unfortunately, hallucinations, they say, are a feature rather than a bug in these models. LLMs hallucinate because they're trained to predict the statistically plausible word based on some input, but when they can't distinguish what is logistically probable from what is factually correct. So this is what they've said in the report. Obviously, we're very early on in this AI development, and they may find ways around this to make it better. And, this comes from the BIS annual report. If you're an AI enthusiast and you don't like this, I'll pray for you because this is coming right out of their report. But also, please listen to my very smart and very brilliant younger brother Scott's presentation, because he actually has some ideas on how this can be handled and met these challenges. So other major banks are using artificial AI. JP Morgan Chase is using it for customer service. They've started focusing on AI 6 years ago. Bank of America is using it for fraud detection, using AI algorithms for real-time transaction monitoring, preventing potential threats and boosting client security. And Wells Fargo is using AI in risk management, trading, and compliance. It's also using it to process vast data, optimize investments, and ensure regulation compliance. And that might be a good application for AI. So AI is very young. I'm sure it's in development, but this is what we're seeing coming from the central banks. All of this is basically the evidence I have to show you that we are truly living in the last days. And, I don't want us to fail this test. I don't want to see anyone fail this test because they're a little too attached to their money or their possessions. So I think that we really need to wrap our heads around this. We really do. And the way that we can prepare for this is to pray, 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 and read your Bible and pray every day. So, the more we can develop our relationship with God, He will sustain us when we can't buy or sell. We don't have to fear the time that we won't be able to buy or sell because we worship God and we are sealed with God's seal. Even though we can't buy or sell, God will provide for us. He's told us that in the Bible, and His promises are true. So please don't have a spirit of fear. I'm just showing you this because I need to show you how close we are. I need to show you that it's time to prepare. If you are not prepared, now is your invitation to prepare by developing a relationship with Jesus. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations.